Okay, Kavalpi. So we are up to Tini Shua. So what we were learning last week is there was machlekes between Rabbi Yosef ben Akafar and the Rabbanon. And the machlekes was in the parsha of Machzer Grushasai, it says L'shashav l'kachta v'lo sitamu. So it uses the word tuma. Rabbi Yosy Akafar learns that to tell us, it says Acharei Asher Hu Tama. It says that by Machshir Rishosei. Rabbi Yosy ben Kippur tells us that the purpose of that word is to tell us that the only time it's also to take back a woman that you divorced who was married to somebody else, if she became Tameh, means she was Nivelas to the second husband. But if she only had Erison, which means there was never an intimate relations, then she would be mutter to be taken back to her original husband. The Chachamim says Acharei Asher Tama does not belong in the parsha of Machshir Rishosei, and it's not telling you any halacha related to Machshir Rishosei. And therefore, Machshir Rishosei, whether it's from the Erison or Minan Yisuin, either way, it's still going to be Aser. What is Acharei Asher Tama referring to? It's referring to Saita. So let's get back to our question. Machzer Grushasei. If someone takes his Grusha back, according to Yosy ben Kippur, it's called Acharei Asher Tama. It's called Tameh, meaning it's like an erva, which means you cannot do Yivam, and you shouldn't have to do Chalitza either, because it's like an erva. It's called Tameh. According to the Rabbanon, Tosfos says that she would be parted from Yivam, but she would still need Chalitza. So that's the halacha by the woman herself. If someone was Machzer Grushasei, the woman herself is pater, according to Yosy ben Kippur, she's pater from Yibum and from Chalitza. She's like an erva. And according to Rabbanon, she needs Chalitza. Now the Gemara asks, what would be with her tzara? So Reuven was married to two wives. One of his wives he was married to and he was always married to. The other wife he divorced, she married somebody else, and then he took her back. And the Gemara wants to know, what is the halacha? What is the halacha with the tzara? Does he do yibum on the tzara? Does he do chalitza on the tzara, or nothing at all? What is the status with this tzara? That was the question that the Gemara asked, and I believe it was Rabbi Yehuda who asked this question of Rab Sheshes. So let's see if we could find it. Rabbi Yehuda asked the question of Rab Sheshes. Yeah, boy minei Rabbi Yehuda me Rab Sheshes. So now we're up to Rab Sheshes' response to this shaila. The tzara of this woman who's Machshir Rishosei, the tzara of this woman, what is the status with her? So Amalei Rab Sheshet said, Tini Suha. We actually have a brisa that addresses this question. And this is what the brisa says. So once again, we're on Daf, Yud Aleph Amud Beis. We're about 10 to 15 lines up from the wide lines. Tini Suha. Hoisa achas kshera, the achas psula. What if someone was married to one woman who was a kosher woman and one that was possible? What these words mean, we don't know yet. But he had two wives. Reuven had two wives. One was a ksher, one was a psula, and he died. So im hayachaylet, if the brother wants to do chalitza, chaylet lepsula, let him do chalitza on the woman who's possible. Im hayimiyabim, but if the brother wants to do yibum, miyabim lekshera, let him do yibum on the kosher. So the Gemara asks, my ksher or my psula? What does this mean? One wife was kosher and one of these widows were possible. Ilema kshera la'alma, and psula means psula la'alma, which Rashi explains, kosher l'kuna, or not kosher l'kuna. So let's make it clear. Reuven, who had two wives who died, was not a kohen. He was a Yisrael. Shimon, who's doing the Yibum, was not a kohen, of course. He was a Yisrael. Nevertheless, the Brisa says, if one of the women would be kosher to marry a kohen, and one of the women would not be kosher to marry a kohen, then let the woman who's kosher to marry a kohen. You could do yibum on her, but if you do chalitza on the woman who's possible to marry a kohen. So let's figure this out. The woman who's possible to marry a kohen was the gerusha, because we know a kohen may not marry a gerusha. The woman who's kosher to marry a kohen would be the almana, because an almana is mutter to marry a kohen. So let's see what it says. If it's speaking about just any old woman, so I take back what I said about almana and chalutza. Let's say one of them had a psul, one of them didn't have a psul. So the halacha is you do Yibum on the Kshera and Chalitza on the Psula. For the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense. Because Kivan de Ludidei Chazir, Shimon, who's doing the Yibum, he's not a Kohen, he's a Yisrael. So he can marry a woman who's kosher to Kuna, but he could also marry a woman who's possible to Kuna. He's just a regular Yisrael. So therefore, my nafkale mina. What does it make a difference if one of the women is kosher l'kuna, one is not kosher l'kuna? He could make yibum on any woman that he wants. Ella lav kshera means kshera lei, and psula means psula lei. It must be that one of these women he's allowed to marry, and one of these women he's not allowed to marry. And what would be a good example of such a case? Our case of the Grusha, that he took back, the Machzer Grushase. So the Umayni Machzer Grushase. Let's say this Bryce was speaking about a case of Machzer Grushase. There are two wives. One wife was the one who is Machzer, one is the other wife, Vikatani. And the Mishnah says about such a case, if he wants to make Yibum, he should make Yibum on the Tzara. So you see clearly that the Tzara you can make Yibum on. So your Shaila Rabbi Yehuda to Rabbi Sheshes was, what is the status of the tzara of this woman who came back after she was divorced? From this bride, you see that you can make Yibum on her. Zok Gemara, no, you don't have a raya that you can make Yibum on her. La'olam ksher means ksher la'alma, psula means psula la'alma. The kosher woman means she's a woman who's allowed to marry a kohen, and the woman who's possible means she's not allowed to marry a kohen. For whatever other reason. Why is that relevant to this person, Shimon, who's making Yibum, who's a Yisrael? It doesn't matter whether or not this woman is kosher l'kuna or not. You ask the question, what's the difference? So because Rabbi Yosef is teaching us the halacha of recycling. The Amar Rabbi Yosef. And before we learn this, I actually want to share a story that happened to a friend of mine. I have a friend who's a Baal Tshuva, and he went to a Baal Tshuva yeshiva. And when he became from, there was an issue that boys that were Kohanim had a real problem finding a shidduch. Why? Because a Kohen is not allowed to marry a girl who had relations before. And the problem is, once people become from older, when they're older teenagers, many of the girls have already had relations, and because of that, they're possible to marry a Kohen. And this boy, who's a friend of mine, tells me, I met this girl, and this girl was known that she never had relations. And when I got engaged to her, he says, I was in Israel, all of the Kohanim in this Baal Tshuva yeshiva were very upset with me because they told me, you could have married any girl. We're so limited in our selection of who we can marry. Why did you marry her? It's not right. He's thinking to himself, don't be ridiculous. She's my Basher. But at the end of the day, people were a little bit upset at him. He said, I remember the Kohanim were very upset at me. So that's exactly what this is saying. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Kan Shana Rebbe taught us something very important, a very important lesson. Lo yishbach adamei boiroi. Don't throw out your wastewater. If someone needs them. So you should always recycle. Never throw away what's not valuable to you. It might be valuable to somebody else. So here you have two women. One of these women is mutar l'kahuna. She would be able to marry a kohen to remarry. And the other woman wouldn't be able to remarry a kohen anyway. So if you're going to make chalitza on a woman, don't make chalitza on the woman. You're rejecting him anyway. You're making chalitza. So don't make chalitza on the woman that could have otherwise married a kohen. Because once you make chalitza on the woman, she can no longer marry a kohen. Make chalitza on the woman who anyway is usher to a kohen. This way, at least, her options are still as wide as possible for remarriage because she could even marry a kohen. Akadavach Rabbi Weinberg, it's such an honor that you're joining us.
Good to work.
If we can extend it a little bit. Today was the Shushan Purim for Yerushalayim. Today was the Shushan Purim for Shushan. So we can stretch it out a little bit. So we are about 5 lines up from the wide lines on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis.
Say that again. You pay 5 lines up from the wide lines. Okay, I got it.
Yud Aleph Amud Beis. So we're not yet on today's Daf, but we're going to get there.
Okay.
So we just learned that Rabbi Yosef taught us.
What are the words, Yossi? What are the words?
We're up to Tashma Hamakshuk Grushasei. It's actually 3 lines up from the wide lines, and the first word on the line is Tashma Machshuk Grushasei.
What do you mean 3 lines up from the wide lines? Below the wide lines?
Above the wide lines. So if you go to the top wide line and you count up 3 lines, the first word on the line will be Tashma.
Yeah.
So we're analyzing the Shaila. A man was married to two women. One of these women he was Machshir Rishasai. He wasn't really allowed to marry her. And the other woman is a regular wife, and he dies. The question is his brother allowed to do Yibum on the wife that was a kosher wife, that he was allowed to marry? Tashma. The Gemara wants to bring another raya. And this is the Brisa is saying an exact case, so it's a very easy raya. Hamachshir Rishasai Mishanisis. He Vitzarasa Chayletzes. Both her and the tzara does chalitza. Correct the Gemara. This brisa, as it stands, makes no sense. He vitzarasa sol kadaitach. You never do chalitza on two women. Only one of the wives do you do chalitza on. So there's a mistake in this brisa. Ella, we're going to have to amend the brisa and read it as follows: Ema oy he oy tzarasa. Either the woman herself, who was the grusha, or her tzara, you make chalitza. So you have a raya from here that you only could do chalitza on the tzara, and you cannot do yibum on the tzara. So you can't bring me a raya from a brisa that you had to amend. Didn't you amend the brisa to make it make sense? Once you're amending the brisa, then I could amend it even further because the brisa is no longer accurate. Tritzachi, say this is what the brisa says. He chayletzes, the grusha herself, you have to do chalitza and you can't do yibum. But tzarasa, the other wife, oy chayletzes, oy Yosy Yevamos. So therefore, you don't have a raya from a brisa because the brisa itself is not accurate. Okay, now the rest of the Gemara will be pretty much the same rayas, the same two rayas that we just discussed, presented in slightly different fashion. So the next little while should be very easy. Amar Rabbi bar Abba, Amar Rabbi I'm sorry. Amar Rabbi bar Abba, comma. Rabbi Yochanan Boi. Rabbi Yochanan asked the following question. Exactly the question that we were just dealing with. What is the status of the tzara? Amar Lei, Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami responded to Rabbi Yochanan's question, and he asked him like a typical Jew. You always answer a question with a question. Why are you asking me what is the status of the co-wife? Why did you ask me the Machshir Rishasai, the grusha herself? What is the halacha with her? So Zok Rabbi Yochanan, he gufa loikam abayim. I don't have any question about what her status is. Namrina, we know for sure that you would not be able to do yibum on the woman herself. Why not? Because it's a kal v'chomer. The mutter law nesra, the husband that would be normally mutter to her, she became aser because she was a grusha. But aser law, her husband's brothers who are chayiv kares because of eshes ach, like kol shekain, surely she should remain aser to them. So we have a kal v'chomer that says that the grusha herself, you for sure cannot do yibum on. But where I do have a question is Tharasa, the co-wife, who's not aser to her husband. Ma, mi alim kal v'chomer lemitchitzar. When we say that because of the kal v'chomer, it makes her into a shtickle erva, and therefore her tzara will also be aser to do yibum on, oy or not. That was one version how Rabbi Yochanan Shaila was presented. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Hachin, he had a different version as to how Rabbi Yochanan's question was presented. Amar Rabbi bar Abba, boy Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan had a shaila. Hamachshir grushasai bishanisis. If someone was machshir grushasai illegally, what would be the halacha? Asking about the grusha herself, not about the tzara. Amar Rabami v'tiboy lach tzarasa. Once again, you answer a question with a question. Why are you asking me a question about her status? Why did you ask me the question about her tzara status? I have no question that he can do yibam on the tzara. The kal v'chomer that asks her to her husband and her to do yibam shouldn't create an erva that would also pass on to the tzara. My whole question is he gufa my. The woman herself, who was the grusha who came back, is there a chiyav yibam for her? Mi alam kal v'chomer b'makam mitzvah. Do you say that even though there's a kal v'chomer, but there's a mitzvah of yibum that should trump the kal v'chomer? Or maybe b'makam mitzvah we would let her do yibum. Okay, so now we're ready to turn to the daf of the day, which is Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and I'm switching over now to Yud Beis Amud Aleph. So we're still dealing with the shaila of the tzara of the Yevama, the tzara of the woman who was divorced. Do we do yibum on her, or can we only do chalitza? So Amar Lei, Yehuda answered. Reb Ami answered. Tini Sua. It's a brisa, and now we're going to repeat word for word the same two rayas that we had already learned. So this should be very easy. A deceased person had two wives, one that was kosher, one that was possible. If he decides he wants to do chalitza, let him do chalitza on the woman who's possible. And if he was going to do yibum, let him do yibum on the woman who's kosher. Mike Shera, Mike Psula. What exactly is this brisa referring to when it says this woman was kosher and this woman was possible? Ilemek Shera means Shera la'almo, and Psula means Psula la'almo. And like we saw on Amud Beis, we're talking about whether or not this woman is mutter to a kohen. So we're saying if there's two wives, one is mutter to a kohen and one's also to a kohen, let him do yibum on the one who is mutter to the kohen. Yet if he wants to do chalitza, let him do chalitza on the one that's also to the kohen. On that, the Gemara asked, Kivan de l'didei chazi, since this Yavam is a Yisrael, so the fact of whether or not she's mutter or also to a kohen is irrelevant to him. Manaf kalamina. Elalav, what the bride must be referring to is Sheira Lei and Psula Lei. The bride must be talking about one of these two wives is mutter for the Yavam to marry, and one of these two wives is also for the Yavam to marry. What a good example of such a scenario. Umayniu machzor grushasai vikatani, and the bride says paskins. So it says clearly the kshera, which would be referring to the tzara, you could do yibum on. So you have a raya that the tzara of a woman who was divorced and her husband was machzor grushasai, the tzara of that woman can do yibum. Dr. Gemara, no, loy, that's not how we would learn. The bride said we would learn kshera la'alma and psula la'alma. We're talking about whether or not this woman is kosher to a kohen or not. The Gemara asked, you asked me a question, why would it make a difference as to who I select to do yibum with, whether or not she's mutter to a kohen or not? I'm a Yisrael. And the answer was, Mishum Reb Yosef. A person shouldn't throw things out, a person should recycle. Dama Reb Yosef, Kan Shana Rebbe. Rebbe is teaching us a very important lesson by telling you to only do chalitza on the woman who's possible to kuna anyway. And that is Yishbach Adam Mei Bayrat Vachem Tricham Lam. Don't throw out your wastewater if you know somebody could benefit from the wastewater. Save it for them. So here you have two women that you could do chalitza to. One woman who's anyway usher to a kohen, the other woman who's a widow who needs to remarry. And she wants to have as many options open to her in her remarriage. She wants to even be able to marry a kohen. If you do chalitza on her co-wife, she'll just be a regular almana and she'll be able to marry a kohen. But if you do chalitza on her, you make her into a chalutza who may not marry a kohen. So don't ruin her prospects for remarriage and limit her to only a Yisrael. Rather, let her just be a regular almana, leave her alone, and at least she'll be able to remarry a kohen if she finds somebody. Gewaltig. Tashma. Now we bring the second raya that we already learned on the Beis. Hamachzor grushasai mishanitzes. He vitzarasa chayletzes. Frank Gemara. He vitzarasa look at you only do chalitza on the one woman, not on two. So you have a raya that they only do chalitza, not yibum. Frank Gemara. Didn't you just say that this brisa is not reliable? Allah to Ritza Kamatarchas law. So I'll amend it further. Tritzachi. He chayletzes. Charasa oy chayletzes oy mishabemes. So you don't have a raya. So we still remain with this shaila that we haven't come to a psak halacha. The tzara of a woman who was machzor grushasai, the tzara, do you do yibum on her or must you do only chalitza? We do not have an answer to that question, but we're going to move on now to another subject. Amar Rab Lili bar Mamal, Amar Rab Ukva, Amar Shmuel. Rab Lili bar Mamal said in the name of Rab Ukva, in the name of Shmuel. And this is what he said. Tzaras mima'enes atzura. So what is a tzaras mima'enes? A very, very simple case. Reuven was married to two women. Let's say Rachel and Leah. Rachel is a katana. She's a katana who her brothers married her off. So she's only really midirabanan married to Reuven. And Reuben died. And now these two almanas, Rachel and Leah, Rachel who's the Kana, Leah who's an adult, they fall to Yibum to Shimon. And Rachel decides, I don't want to be married to Shimon. So she made miyun on Shimon, not on her husband Reuben, but after her husband died, she made miyun on Reuben, I don't want to be married to you. So the halacha is not only can Shimon not marry this young girl who made miyun, he also cannot do Yibum on Leah, who's a regular, normal wife. But the Gemara is saying here that Tzaras Mima Enes is a surah to do Yibum on. We're not going to pass him like this. Leman, exactly who are we talking about that may not do Yibum on the Tzara of the Mamanis? If we're talking about the brothers, meaning instead of just having Reuben and Shimon, maybe Levi and Yehuda were in the picture as well. And what happened was Rachel did miyun to Shimon, and we're saying that not only is Shimon usher to marry Rachel, but Levi and Yehuda may also not marry, never mind Rachel, they're not even allowed to marry the Tzara of Rachel. Correct the Gemara, that's not logical, because Hashta he gufa shari. If this girl Rachel makes miyun to Shimon, Levi and Yehuda are even allowed to marry this girl Rachel. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel himself said, Miya Nabazeh, if Rachel said, I don't want to be married to Shimon, Muteres Bezeh, she would be still allowed to marry Levi or Yehuda. So Tarathami Boy, if the other brothers, if Levi and Yehuda could marry Rachel herself, they can surely marry Leah. Ella Lididei, the question, the halacha that Shmuel said that Tzaras Memenes is Aser, that means to Shimon. If Rachel does miyun to Shimon, then Shimon can no longer do Yibum even on Leah. Frag to Gemara, what's the reason? Why is it that Rachel could marry Levi or Yehuda? Because there's no answer here that would create a problem for the brothers to marry her, because nobody made Yibum or Kedushin on her. Tzara Nami, the Tzara of Rachel, who happens to be Leah, there's no Maisa made on her. So why cannot Shimon do Yibum? Just because Rachel did miyun, why should that aser Shimon from marrying Leah? Dr. Gemara, the answer is Mishum Gzeira, Mishum Tzaras, Bitai, Mimanis. The reason why any girl who makes miyun, we don't allow you to marry even her tzara, even though there's nothing wrong with it at all, is because of Gzeir of Tzaras, Bitai, Mimanis. So what's that case? It's a case that we sort of discussed in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that if Shimon was married to Reuben's daughter, Reuben had a daughter, Rachel, and Shimon was married to Reuben's daughter. So Shimon is married to Rachel, and Shimon has another wife, a complete stranger to everybody, by the name of Shprinzi. So we know the halacha is that if Shimon dies, Rachman Litzlan, without children, Reuben may not do Yibum on his daughter, Rachel, and because the erva is usher to him, the tzaras erva is usher to him as well, Reuben wouldn't be able to do Yibum even on Shprinzi. Right? That was the very first case we had in our Masechta in the first Mishnah. Now, what would happen if Reuben's daughter, Rachel, made miyun? She made miyun. Would Reuben be allowed to marry Shprinzi? Would Reuben be able to do Yibum on Shprinzi? The Gemara right here, right now, assumes that she wouldn't. So the Gemara says, since if it's his own daughter, if it's Reuben's own daughter doing miyun, we won't let Reuben's not allowed to do Yibum to Shprinzi. Therefore, even in a case where it's not Reuben's daughter, even where everyone's strangers and Shimon dies and he leaves over two daughters, two wives, and one of the wives make miyun, we won't let his brother do Yibum on any one of the wives. Freit the Gemara, you're basing everything on the assumption that Tzaras Bitim Mima'anis is also. But if you look into our Mishnah, the first Mishnah in the Parak, it says beferish that it's not also. Freit the Gemara, but Tzaras Bitim Mima'anis Miyasira, is the tzara of your daughter who's mamayin, is she also? But none, our Mishnah says very clearly, v'chulam, all of these are rayas, in mesu miyanu, if they died or they made miyun, which means their marriage to your brother was nullified, well, then Torah saying mutaris. Then their Torahs would be mutar. So let's think about this. When did this occur, this miyun? The miyuna b'man. Who did you make miyun on? So let's recreate the case so we're clear in what we're talking about. Reuben's daughter Rachel married Shimon. Bitai. That's the case. That the first case in our Mishnah. If Reuben's daughter Rachel falls to Yibum because his brother Shimon married his daughter, and then Shimon dies, of course Reuben cannot do Yibum. Our Mishnah also says that not only can Reuben not do Yibum on Rachel, Reuben can't even do Yibum on Shprinzi, who's Shimon's other wife. However, what if Rachel is a Ktana and she did Miyun? Then Reuben could do Yibum on Shprinzi. So the question is, who did Rachel do Yibum on? Zog to Gemara. When the Miyun of B'man, Ilema the Miyun of B'Baal, if you're telling me that when did Rachel reject this marriage? When Shimon was still alive, and she rejected Shimon. So she was not married to Shimon when Shimon died. When Shimon died, Shimon had only one wife, Shprinzi. Well, Hanu Grusha, that's just like Shimon divorced a wife who was an Erva. And of course, if Shimon dies and he only has one wife, Shprinzi, surely Reuven is allowed to do Yibum. So I don't need a Mishnah to tell me that, because the Mishnah already lists off Grusha as one of the cases where you could do Yibum. Ella la v'yovin. It must be that as long as Shimon was alive, Rachel was happy married to Shimon. After Shimon died, and now Rachel fell to Yibum to her father, she says, you know, Tati, I don't think I want to do this. I don't want to marry you. So she'd only made Miyun after she had already fallen to Yibum to her father. And in that case, our Mishnah says that the father, Reuven, could now do Yibum on Shprinzi, on Shimon's other wife, even though his daughter only made Miyun after Shimon had already died. That's not shot in the Mishnah. The only time Reuben's allowed to marry Shprinzi, if his daughter does Yibum, that's only if his daughter did Yibum, if his daughter did Miyun, is only if his daughter Rachel did Miyun when Shimon was still alive. So she already was disconnected from Shimon by the time Shimon died. You had a kasha. Why do we need to list such a case? Why is that any different than Grusha? Utrei Gavni Gerushin. The Mishnah is just listing two possibilities of how the Erva could be disconnected from the brother, from Shimon, in his lifetime. Either Shimon could have divorced her, or she would have made Miyun.
Yosy?
Sorry? Yes.
I'm just trying to understand something. Normally, the process of Miyun is when you refuse your husband. We're saying now, we're creating a new thing. We're creating that when you fall to someone for Yibum, he's not your husband, you just have a Zika with him or something, that there's a new concept that you could do Miyun to cut off that husband that you're gonna fall to.
So you want to understand that concept?
I'm just saying, I just want to clarify, is that what we're saying?
The very next line in the Gemara is going to clarify, because it's a very good point. What exactly is Miyun, and how does it work? And what is it doing? So Zok the Gemara, Umayshna Kimiyun of a Baal. How is the mechanics? How do the gears turn? How does it work when she makes Miyun on her husband if Shimon was alive? That Karinul in the Suin. It would retroactively eliminate the marriage to Shimon. So for the Gemara, Kamina b'Yavim, when she makes Miyun on the Yavim, how does it work? Exactly what you're asking her about. Kamina b'Yavim nami nisuin kamayuk akra. When she's making Miyun on the Yavim, in this case it's Reuven, her father, what she's doing is she's not breaking the Zika, she's also retroactively breaking the original marriage. Kum D'chai, she was never married to Shimon in the first place. So there's really no difference at all, technically, between if she made Miyun while her husband Shimon was still alive, or if she only made Miyun after Shimon died. Either way, it's doing exactly the same thing. It's retroactively uprooting the marriage to Shimon. So why should one be Asur and one be Mutter? And for the Gemara, it's
just going a step further. Let's say a woman, a katana is married to a man, and nothing to do with Yibum now. The man has children, whatever, and the man dies. So now theoretically she's a grusha, I would assume. So could she say, I now want to retroactively?
She's an almana. If a man dies, she's an almana.
I mean, an almana.
right?
So could she retroactively go back and say, I want to go back to that man who's dead and make a mean on him, and now I'm not an almana, I can marry a kohen gadol.
You can't marry a kohen gadol anyway.
Okay, or whatever nafkamina would come out of it. Whatever nafkamina would come out of it, because she's retroactively taking a man who's dead and doing mean with him.
I don't know. It's a good question theoretically. I'm not sure why she would want to do that. What would you be trying to accomplish with that?
What I'm trying to say is it doesn't make sense here. When a man's dead, how do you be miyabim? How do you do mean with a dead man?
She could say, I don't want to. The halacha is that when someone has a kedusha d'rabbanan, she could do that because it was never really a kedusha in the first place. So you're saying the whole concept of miyun after death is a chiddush concept.
I would think so,
and I agree with that. It's a chiddush concept. So the Gemara here wants to know, whatever it is, there's no reason why there should be a difference in how it functions if the miyun works when her husband was still alive, or if the miyun works when her husband has already died. Either way, it's retroactively removing the matrimony, and therefore, there's no reason why her father should not be mutter on her co-wife. And for the Gemara, you're right. Technically, there's no difference, but it's all about the optics. It's all about whether Chazal saw a reason to make a gzera. Mishum the Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel, where it depends on how it looks. The Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel, Miyana Babal, Muteres La'aviv. What happened, and this is not a case of Yibum, what happened was Reuven was married to a Ketana, and the Ketana said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. Is Reuven's father Yaakov allowed to marry this girl, Rachel? And the answer is for sure he's allowed to. Because Kalasoi, he's not allowed to live with his daughter-in-law. But that's only through a matrimony, through a marriage. But just the fact that Reuven was married to her temporarily, that does not create an Isser. And Rashi explains why. Because when she makes miyun, when Rachel makes miyun and breaks the marriage that she had with Reuven, basically what it's doing is it's retroactively saying that every time she was with Reuven, it was nus. She was a mafuta. So her miyun makes her relationship up until that point into nus. Now, a father, Reuven, is allowed to marry a woman who his son was mezana with. He's not allowed to marry a woman who his son was married to, but he is allowed to marry a woman who his son was mezana with. And therefore, Rami Bar Yecheskel said, miyun ababal, if a girl makes miyun on her husband, muteres laviv, she's allowed to marry her husband's father. However, biyoven, what if this is the case? What if there was Reuben and Shimon, and she was married to Reuben as a ketana, and then Reuben died, and she fell to Yibum to Shimon, and she made Yibum, and she made miyun? Technically, she's still undoing Reuben's marriage. Nevertheless, there it's asur laviv. There we say it's asur. You know why? Because once more stuff happens in her relationship, her husband dies and she falls Yibum to Shimon, that already looks too much like a real marriage. So midirabanan, we say, once this extra event occurred in their marriage, that her husband died and she felt even for Shimon, that extra event makes a perception that she's married to him, and therefore the Rabban Regoizer that she should not be able to marry the father anymore, because we treat her like she was married. Alma, you see from this psak that mishas nefila, once a woman falls to Yibum, even though she could make Yibum, make miyun and retroactively remove the marriage, it's nearest kikalosai. She looks like the daughter-in-law of Yaakov when she makes miyun after Reuben's death. Hakanami, in our case, mishas nefila nearest ketzaris bita. The moment she falls to Yibum, the moment Shimon dies, and Rachel falls to Yibum to her father, even though she made miyun, and technically it's all batal mafreya, but once that step occurred, that she fell to Yibum, it looks too much like it's Torah's Bitoy, and midirabanan, they're going to answer it. So let's take a step back. So now we know why. Now we know why that the tzara of a mima'enes is osir. A tzara of a mima'enes is osir if she only made miyun after her husband died. Our Mishnah said that if she made miyun before her husband died, then her tzara is mutter. But if she only made miyun after her husband died, midarabanan, her tzara is aser. And bibal they aser the tzara of bita mima'enes, they went and made another gzeira and they asered every tzara of a mima'enes because it shouldn't get confused with his daughter who was a mima'enes. Okay, and that takes us to the end of the sugya of mima'enes. Now I want to remind everybody, the very first sugya in Yevamos was minyana de reisha l'mutimai and minyana de seifa l'mutimai. And the Gemara suggested 4 cases that our Gemara will tell us later, which we're now learning, where our Gemara holds. Our Gemara holds there's no yibum or chalitza. So we just learned tzaras and mima'enes, there's no yibum or chalitza. Minyana de reisha l'mutei this. Our Mishnah only lists off 15 women that are arise, that only these women pater are pater from yibum and pater their tzara from yibum. But our Mishnah excludes the tzaras mima'enes. So this is the case that the Gemara mentioned earlier, our Mishnah excludes. So although this sugya Shmuel said that tzaras ma'enes, she's aser, and her tzara is aser, our Mishnah disagrees with that. Okay, now we have the other case that the Gemara discussed. Amar Abasi, tzaras islandess, right? That was another case where our Mishnah does not include, and therefore the minion is to be mamait this case. Tzaras islandess asura.
Give the line, yes, please.
I'm sorry?
Where are we, the line?
Right now I'm up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines up from the wide lines. Amar Rav Asi. So Amar Rav Asi, tzaras islandess asura. If a man is married to a woman who's an islandess who cannot have children, so of course there's no yibum on her, but not only is there no yibum on her, if there's a co-wife, you won't do yibum on the co-wife either. Again, our Mishnah disagrees with this, but this is Rabbi Asi Shita. Shenemar. It says in the parasha of Yibum, V'hoya b'chor asher teled. It says asher teled, which are extra words to teach us that the only woman that's mechuyev in Yibum is a woman that could possibly give birth. Prat l'islandess she'ena yoyledes. An islandess cannot give birth, and therefore there's no din Yibum on her. And since there's no Yibum on her, and it's a deraisa, so you learn it from Asher Taylor. Since midaraisa, she can't do yibum. She also paters her tzara. Most of Reb Sheshes has a kasha on Rabasi. From a brisa, a totally unrelated brisa. Shloisha achen nesun shalosh nashim renachiyos. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are married to 3 girls that have no connection to each other. Umeis echad mehen. Reuven died. V'alta b'sheni maimer. Shimon didn't do yibum. And Shimon didn't do chalitza. He made mimer. Mimer is kedushin. It's not one of the official doiraisa sanctioned options of what one should do with the widow of his wife. But it's something that someone did. He made kedushin. So it sort of creates a quasi relationship. He's a shtickle mekudeshes to her, but not really, because she's still a shemeres yovam. So again, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven died, and Shimon made mimer on Reuven's almana. So now Shimon has his own wife, and he has the almana of Reuven that he made mimer on. Umeis, and then he dies. Boy, did this mess everybody up. Harei elu choltzos. Both of Shimon's wives have to do chalitza. V'lo mishabes, they can't do yibum. Why? Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Umeis echad mehem. If one brother dies and the woman is falling to yibum from one brother, then Yevama Yavay Aleh, then you could do yibum. Misha Aleh, Zikas Yavam Echad, a woman who only is falling to yibum because she's the almana of one husband, that's one who you could do yibum on. V'loi Zikas Shnei Yavam. But a woman who now is connected to Reuven and to Shimon and falling to Levi that way, that woman would not be mechuyev in yibum. Let's see Rashi. We're going to see that this is not a deraisa, this is only a derabban. Let's see Rashi. And in Rashi, Dibur Amaschol, Dichsiv Umeis Echad Mehen. And this is, if you count up the skinny lines of Rashi, it's 7 lines up the last word on the line. Dichsiv Umeis Echad Mehen. And Rashi tells us, V'loizu, this excludes Reuven's wife, Shemesu Beis Bailach. Reuven died on her, Shimon did Maimer, and then Shimon died on her. So because of that, v'zika shneim aleha, she has the zika of two men on her, because she was married to Reuben, and she's his almana, and she was Maimered to Shimon, and she's his almana. U'shtein asur midirabana. Both of Shimon's wives will be usher for Levi to do Yibamon midirabana. Ukra asmach the ba'alma. The pasuk is just on the smach. It's only dirabana. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the Gemara.
Didn't we just find the answer why we need alaha?
Can you please say that again?
It says allow. We're learning it out of alaha. We just solved our problem of alaha.
The Allah that we were trying to find a purpose for was not the Allah by Yevama Yavayala. It's the Allah in the pasuk of Shtei Chayos. Right? So one mandaber uses it to teach us halacha by Yibam, and the other mandaber learns it to teach us halacha of when you bring a par helam davar shal tzibur. So I don't think it's the Yavama Yavayala that we're looking for. We're looking for the Allah of Shtei Chayos. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. The Katani Allah, and we had a brisa that further clarifies this halacha that we just learned. That since Shimon now is connected to Reuben's wife, and now Reuben's wife is following to Levi from Shimon and from Reuben, Levi may not do the Ibam, not on her and not on Shimon's other wife. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Zuhi, this case that we just mentioned, that's called Tsaras Eshes Ach Me'av. It's the tzara of my brother's wife from my father. She'isr nefila garim la. And Rashi says, let's look at Rashi at the end of the first wide line. She'isr nefila garim la. What does that mean? She'nafla be'ez pa'amim mizika achas. The reason why she's usher is because of her nefila. She had one too many nefilas. She fell twice to Ibam instead of once to Ibam. That's why it's usher. And then the Gemara goes on to say, which is Rabbi Yosef's comment, Shaloi matzinu b'chol haTorah kula. We don't find anything in the Torah to go in Zois, something like this. Rashi explains, what does that mean? So Rashi, on the second wide line, Shaloi matzinu b'chol haTorah shetei. There's no place in the Torah that says that this woman, who was Reuben's almana and then did Maimer to Shimon, there's nowhere in the Torah that says you don't do evil. Ela midirabanan hu de mitzvah. She's only usher to fall to Yibam to Levi, midirabanan. She'ein kan isur erva. There is no isur erva, but it's a tzarasa. There's no avering. So Zok the Gemara, Daf gezois. This one is dirabanan. This one you cannot do Yibam on midirabanan. Zui lamute mai. What exactly was Rabbi Yosef trying to tell us? What message was Rabbi Yosef trying to tell us when he said Dafka, this case is a problem, but not other cases? Lav lamute, Tsaras islandess. Wouldn't you argue that what he's trying to tell you is that this here makes it that these women cannot fall to Yibum to Levi, but that Tsar of an islandess, the Shari, she would be mutter, which is not like Ravasi, which is a kash on Ravasi, who said that the Tsar of an islandess, you don't do Yibum or Chalitza. So you have to more lie. Absolutely not. That's not what the Bryce said. That's not what the Bryce was trying to tell us. What he's trying to tell us is Lamute Tzaras islandess da Asira. It's to tell me that a Tzaras islandess may not do Yibum. I umay zuhi. Doesn't it say this case with the three brothers and Reuben's wife who married Shimon? That's the one that's also to do Yibum. Isn't it going to say that the other thing was mutter to Yibum? So tomorrow, no. Zuhi the Isra Nefila Garam law. This case where Reuben's wife felt to Shimon did Maimer, this case where it's only the Isra only comes from the fact that she's falling to Levi, Machmas, two brothers, that's the case where it's a Rasa Boy Chalitza. Only in that case where it's only Midrabanan do we say that although you cannot make Yibum on her or her tzara, you do need to do chalitza on her tzara. But idleness, afilu chalitza leiboy. You don't even need to chalitza on idleness, and you don't even need to do chalitza on her tzara. She's completely potter from Yibum. Afilu chalitza leiboy. My time, or what's the reason? Hadaraisa. Islandness is a deraisa. It says Asher Tele, and from there we learn midaraisa. There's no din yibum on an island. She's like an erva, and therefore her tzara will also be part of yibum. But ha derabbanan, the case where Reuben's Avana married Shimon, and Levi can't do yibum, that's not a deraisa. That's only a derabbanan. Since it's only a derabbanan, then on her tzara you would still be mechuyev to make chalitza. Period. Tanam, we learned in our Mishnah. All of these are rayas in Mesu Miyanu. If they died or they made min or niskarsh or they were divorced, all of course in their first husband's life, or to islandness, or if they turned out they were islandness, saying mutaris, their tsaras will be mutar. So here our Mishnah says black and white that the tzara of an islandness you make yibum on. So how could you, Rabasi, tell me that on the tzara of an islandness you don't make yibum on? Our Mishnah is black and white. If the erva became an islandness, the tzara is mutar. Zok to Gemara like kasha. It's not shver from our Mishnah. Where did Rabasi say that the tzara of an islandness is aser shehikirba? Where there's no mekachtos, the nifter is legitimately married to the islandness because he knows she's an islandness and he's happy to be married to her anyway. So it's not a mekachtos. She's his legitimate wife, and therefore she's pater from yibum, and she'll also pater her co-wife from yibum or tzara from yibum, because it says Asher Taylor. She's like an erva midaraisa. Our Mishnah that says nimtu islandness, her tzara you could do yibum on is kan shelo yikerba. That's where her husband didn't know she was an islandness, so it's a mekatos. So she's not even married to him. It's as if she was never married to him. So if she was never married to him, then her tzara is not really her tzara. Her tzara is really the only wife, and of course she will fall to yibum. They cannot be. Now prove it to you that our Mishnah means mekachtos. The katani shenimtzu. It says if she turned out being an islandess, then her tzara is mutter. V'loy katani shahayu. It doesn't say in our Mishnah that if she's an islandess, her tzara is mutter. Because in fact, Rabbi Asi holds if she's an islandess, her tzara is aser. If she turned out being an islandess and we didn't know about it, so her marriage is really dissolved, then her tzara is mutter. Shemamina. Okay, we know that our Mishnah holds these 15 arayos and no more. So we learned that our Mishnah, of course, does not include Tzaras islands. Amar Rava. So now Rava wraps it all up and wraps up the last two blocks, all the different things we were learning. We were learning about Machshav Rishasa. We learned about Tzaras Mamayanis. We learned about islandness. Rava is going to finalize all the halachas for these cases. Amar Rava. And now we're going to turn over to Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Amar Rava. Rava said, Hilchasa, the halach is Tzaras islandness muteres. The tzara of analysis is muter, which is what we held, our Mishnah holds. Va'afilu hikerba. Even if he knows that she's an islandess, it doesn't make a difference. She's out of the picture, but her tzara you surely can do yibum on. Va'afilu tzaras bidai islandess. Even the tzara of his daughter, who's an islandess, which means Shimon married Reuben's daughter, and Shimon married Reuben's daughter, and Shimon has another wife by the name of Sprincy. And it turns out that Reuben's daughter, Rachel, is an islandess. So the halacha is Reuben can do yibum on Shimon's other wife, because the fact that she's an islandess has no impact whatsoever on the co-wife. Ve'ela hadikatani shenimtzu. It says nimtzu, which is mashma only if it's a mekach tos. Do you say that tzaras bidai islandess you could do yibum on? No. Tani shahayu. Let's say that our Mishnah says the same halacha is even if he knew about it. Even if Shimon knew that the erva, the daughter of Reuven, was an islandess, and he was happily married to her, and therefore it's not a mekachtos, so he's talking married to an erva, he's married to the daughter of Reuven. Reuven is still allowed to do yibum on the tzara, on Sprincy. You know why? Because we take her out of the picture. We take the islandess totally out of the picture when it comes to yibum, and she will not impact her tzara, which is a huge chiddush. He also Rabin, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Akas tzaras mima'enes, a tzara of a mamanis, the achas tzaras islandness, the achas tzaras machshir gushosoi, kulam litoros. On all three of these women, you do yibum. So that's the psak halacha. All three of the women that we learned in the last two blocks that there was a shaila whether or not you could do yibum on them, whether Rabashi said you can't do yibum on the tzaras islandness, and we had the tzaras Shmuel said you can't do the tzaras mamanis. Nevertheless, we're passing here that they're all mutter to the Yibman, and that's why our Mishnah makes sense. These 15 arayas and no other ones. Zok to Gemara Baki. Now we're getting into much easier Gemara. Tani for Yevamos studies. Tani Rav Bibi Kamei to Rav Nachman. Rav Bibi said Alocha in front of Rav Nachman. Shalish Noshim, there's three women Mishamajos b'moich are allowed to use contraception. Moich is like putting a shmata inside Oisamokim to prevent zera from fertilizing. So basically, it's contraception. There's three women who are allowed to use contraception. Ketana, Muberis, a woman who's expecting, Umanika, and a woman who's nursing. Ketana, Shema Tesaber. The reason why Ketana can use contraception is because if not, she might become pregnant. The Shema Tamus. And if she becomes pregnant, being that she's a small juvenile body, it might not be able to handle the trauma of a pregnancy, and it might cause her to die. It's not sure, but it could be. It puts her into danger. Muberis, why not? Shema Tasa Ubersandal. If she's already pregnant and she becomes pregnant with a second child, it's going to squash the first child and damage the first child. Now, I don't know how it's possible for a woman who's already pregnant, who does no longer ovulate, to become pregnant. But this is what the Gemara says. Menika, a woman who's nursing, Shema Tiglum Bunaviyams. Nowadays, we have rubber nipples and we're able to feed babies bottles. But in those days, they didn't have that. So if a woman didn't nurse, her child would starve to death. And we're afraid if she becomes pregnant, she's not going to be able to continue nursing, and then the child will die. So therefore, a woman who's pregnant is allowed to use contraception. What age group is this katana that we're saying can use contraception? From when she's 11 to 12, that 1 year. If she's younger than 11, we're not even worried that she'll become pregnant. So there's no reason to use contraception. But yes, okay, then once she's over 12 and she's an adult, we're not concerned that she's going to die if she becomes pregnant. Because at that point, she's strong enough. Therefore, Mishameshes Kedaka V'Halachas. Never have mayor, that's the sheet of her mayor. Even all of these women could do regular tashmish. There's danger, no problem. Hashem will take care of it. So let's analyze this. We said that a katana will become pregnant, but even if she becomes pregnant, it's not for sure that she'll die. She might die. So doesn't that prove that it's possible for a katana to give birth and survive? That's what it sounds like. Mechlal, katana, it's possible that a katana can have a baby and still survive. If that's the case, we have a major problem in our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah says it's impossible to have a case of chamoisai that's a mima enes. But in Cain, matzinu chamoisin enes. You can have a mother-in-law who does meal. What happened? Very simple. A katana had a baby, and Reuben married that baby. So let's say the katana is Rachel and the baby is Bela. Reuben could marry Bela, who is the daughter of Sprinzi, and now Reuben is the son-in-law of Sprinzi. Sprinzi is still young enough to do miyun, because we said a katana can have a child. So you still have a case of a woman who's a mother-in-law who's still underage. We learned in the Mishnah, all of these three people cannot shin into islands. They couldn't have been in islands because how do they have children? They can't make meal. But the question is, maybe they could make meal. It's possible for them to have a child when they're still ketanas, and since they're still ketanos, they can still make meal. Dr. Gemara, you're right. You have to say that it's impossible that they would survive a pregnancy. Don't say the reason why a katana can use contraception This Shevet the Saber, and she'll surely die. Because it's impossible for a Ktana to have a healthy baby. There's limits. Before the danger period, she won't even be able to become pregnant. Before 11. When she's 11, she'll die if she gets pregnant, and so will her child. So it's impossible for a Ktana to have a baby, period. Once she's an adult, so therefore, it's impossible to have a case of a mother-in-law doing miyun, because if she had a viable child, she must be already an adult. Is that so? I'll prove to you that she could have a baby when she's a minor. Because the reason why these women can't make miyun is shekfar yoldu, because they gave birth. So you see Rashi that it's the fact that they gave birth that makes them impossible to be a Ktana. But it's not because they're a Ktana. A Ktana could have very easily had a baby. But here the problem is Shefar Yoldu. What it should have said was Shefar Nizgadlu. If they have children, they must be adults. It doesn't say that. It says because they gave birth already, which seems to indicate that it's possible to give birth even though you're a Ktana. We'll have to agree with you that it's in fact possible that a woman who's a Ktana could have a baby and could survive. So if she could survive, so then how come you can't have a case of a chamoisa who's mimayanes? She had a baby and she's still a Ktana, she can still make miyun. Amar Safra, because Banim Arain Kisimon. If she had a baby, even though she was a Ktana, she's still considered an adult. So if she had a baby, she could no longer make miyun, even though she's less than 12. Because Banim are like Simonim. If someone has children, that's a sign that they're an adult. There are those who say that Banim are a difi Simonim. Banim are a better raya that one is an adult than even Simonim. Simonim, of course, means 2 black hairs in that place. What's the difference? That Banim is even better than Simonim. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that just having 2 black hairs in that place is not enough to make someone a gedolah, to make a girl a gedolah. There has to be a lot of hair there. There's different shot in what it means. It could mean the hair has to be long enough to fold over each other, but there's got to be a lot more than just 2 hairs. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, if she had children, that would be a better raya, because that's for sure a raya that she's an adult. So the feeling of Rabbi Yehuda, but if she had children, Rabbi Yehuda's moida that she is considered an adult. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we're right up to date. We finished Daf Yud Beis, even though there's only a couple of lines to the 2 dots, but we're already, and now we're in, and we're up to date. Baruch Hashem, we caught up. We're very grateful. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and I want to wish everybody a good tavach. And this broadcast should be a schutz for refuah to all those amongst us who need a refuah, including Shimon ben Chasya, and Shimon Yehuda ben Rivka, Yaakov Shmuel ben Chana, and Yisrael Moshe Nittin Gittel, and Eliyahu Shragefavish ben Esther, and all the chaylim should have a refuah shalom.
Yossi, don't leave.
Okay, I'm staying.
I guess that was